Happy Wednesday, Packers Nation. Welcome into an all-new episode of the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can find the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. Thank you, as always, for being here. Really excited about today's show and going over my grade for Aaron Banks from this past season, kind of discussing this ultimate question of, is he worth 4 years, $77 million? How does he fit in on this Packers offensive line? We're going to go through all of that today. And I'm really, like I said, excited to dig into this one because I think it's a really fascinating conversation. And there are some things that I think are very exciting about this Aaron Banks signing. So we'll get into that in just a moment. Before we get there, huge shout out to Tim Tyndall for becoming an all new Pack a Day Podcast YouTube member. Now is a really great time to sign up for those Pack a Day Podcast memberships because there are a bunch of episodes that are coming to you as members right now. Early next week, I'm going to be out of town overseas, and I'm doing a bunch of episodes in advance. And as soon as they're done, they're posted out there. So right now, there's an Aaron Nagler and a Mike Wall episode out there. Now, you as non-members would still get those episodes eventually next week. But if you want to be the first to view, those are going to come at you right now as members. And then you're going to get a bunch more in the next couple of days as well. Plus, Ross Uglum just did a members video. And then, of course, we've got our weekly members-only Q&As. I will, again, be off on that next week, but the following week, we'll pick right back up on that. So if you haven't checked out those memberships yet, make sure to do so. And again, Tim, thank you so much for signing up. As far as a news and notes standpoint for today, nothing directly Packers related. However, Aaron Rodgers was on the Pat McAfee show, and he did state that this is likely to be his final season in the NFL. Now, I will say that I will believe it when I see it. Now, I actually do think this probably is his last year in the NFL. And me saying that is actually not in any sort of disrespect or not non-trust or anything from Aaron, anything like that. It's more of just, I know that the pull of the NFL and what it has on these players. And if the right situation or circumstance would present itself in 2026, I would just never say never with pretty much anybody, but certainly Aaron at this point as well. Like I said, I do expect this is probably his last year. If that is the case, it's a really cool and kind of fun farewell tour. We, again, will get Packers Steelers in week 8. Aaron's one and only opportunity to get a win versus the one team that he does not have a win against. Hopefully Green Bay can keep it that way. And then, again, his journey through the NFC North, he'll play the Lions, the Bears, and the Vikings. He gets to play the Jets in week 1. So I think this will be a fun journey for Aaron Rodgers. And for anyone that is a fan of Aaron, it's a opportunity, again, to see him play one last time throughout the course of this season. It's great television. It's good for football. And I know I'm certainly looking forward to it, whatever that entails. Hopefully it's a fun journey and one that doesn't end in injury or, just disappointment or things like that. But I do think that should be, again, mostly must-watch TV. And again, kudos obviously to Aaron on a phenomenal career. If this is in fact it after this season, but we still have a full season of Aaron Rodgers for the moment. And like I said, I'll actually, even once the retirement papers are filled, and even if he doesn't play at all in 2026, I'm still going to be looking around the corner in like 2027 being like, is there anything that could still entice you? Again, you never quite know with Aaron. But again, if this is it, kudos to him. And it should be a pretty fun and epic journey for the next season to get this kind of farewell tour for Aaron kicked off. And again, not stopping in Green Bay, but stopping against Green Bay along the way in week 8. All right. That brings us to our main topic for today, and that is Aaron Banks. Now, for those of you who have not been following along at home, I have been going through and grading all these free agents over the course of their final season with their former team. For those of you who may not know at all, I grade every player in every game. I've been doing it, I think, since 2017 is the year I believe I started, and assign grades to these players. I also did the same exercise last year when the Packers signed Andre Dillard, Josh Jacobs, and Xavier McKinney. And last year at this time, going back and grading the previous year's, seasons for those players, Andre Dillard in his final year, I gave a negative 6.20 grade, again, prior to signing with Green Bay. Josh Jacobs, I gave a plus 3.65 grade in his final year with the Raiders. And Xavier McKinney, I gave a plus 9.50 grade in his final year with the Giants. How they performed in 2024. Well, Andre Dillard barely played. When he did play, he had a very minimal plus 0.05 grade, but nothing in the negative, which was nice. Xavier McKinney had a plus 6.60 grade. So not quite the plus 9.5 I had on him in the previous year in New York. Many, I think, would argue that because of the interceptions, he had a better year in Green Bay than he did in his final season in New York. I kind of like the full body in New York in that final season just a tad bit better. But the point being is Xavier was awesome his last year in New York, and he was phenomenal in Green Bay this past year. So whatever grade you want to assign doesn't really matter all that much. He was fantastic and a huge signing for the Packers. And then Josh Jacobs, we know that final year in Vegas was a little bit down, plus 3.65. Was the grade that I gave him his year last year in Green Bay, plus 12.85, a massive grade for Josh Jacobs, who was just phenomenal as a Packer this past season. So just kind of fun to look back and see how those grades went, again, when we looked at them right when they signed as free agents, and then how they actually performed as Packers. So my grade so far this year on the free agent class, I had a negative 0.35 grade on Isaiah Simmons last year in New York. McCole Hardman, a plus 0.45 grade from KC this past year. Nate Hobbs, plus 1.50 grade from his time with the Raiders. And now your official grade for Aaron Banks from this past year, plus 2.25. A very solid grade overall. If you're wondering how that would have compared to the Packers offensive lineman this past year, well, you're in luck, because I'm about to tell you exactly what that grade was and how it compares. Zach Tom would have been the leader at plus 5.25, or was the leader at plus 5.25. Elton Jenkins at plus 3.30, Sean Ryan at plus 2.75, Aaron Banks at plus 2.25, Dillard at plus 0.05, Telfort negative 0.45, Morgan negative 0.65, Travis Glover negative 1.15, Rasheed Walker negative 1.6, and Josh Myers negative 2.70. Myers was my lowest graded player on offense this past year for Green Bay. So you might immediately look at this and say, Aaron Banks plus 2.25. Great. They gave a 4-year, $77 million deal to somebody who was a little bit worse than Sean Ryan this past year. More on that in just a moment. Put a pin in that one, because we are going to get there. What I do want to point out here is that what we've talked about in the past, and what many people have alluded to, is that the difference here isn't just signing Aaron Banks, who has a plus 2.25 grade this past year. The difference is you are taking Josh Myers' spot and filling it with Aaron Banks, even if it's not apples to apples, because you're moving Elton Jenkins over. You assume everything stays the same. Elton's still able to grade out as well as he did this past season. And I think he will, assuming he's there and we get to that point, which hopefully is sooner rather than later, when we get that contract situation resolved with Elton. Assuming everything else stays status quo, the difference between Myers at negative 2.7 and Banks at 2.25 is a plus 4.95 difference. Just to put that in comparison, Zach Tom last year for me graded plus 5.25. You're not adding Zach Tom per se, because Banks again was a plus 2.25 player, but the difference going from Myers to Banks is basically the exact same as if you had a neutral level player and you were going to Zach Tom. That's the gap here. And that, I think, is what's really noteworthy and significant, is that we can argue, and we are going to in just a moment, whether or not that plus 2.25 type grade is worth 4 years, $77 million. But I will tell you is the improvement on the offensive line in totality by going from Josh Myers to Aaron Banks should be significant in that addition. What I want to talk about here again first is kind of this idea of 4 years, $77 million for Aaron Banks. And is this worth it? Is he worth that type of deal? Here's what I'll tell you. That plus 2.25 grade is, like I said, right around that Sean Ryan grade. Sean Ryan was a good player last year. So that's not like something that I look at and I'm like, oh my God, they spent 4 years, 77 on Sean Ryan. Yes, that would be a little bit richer than I'd probably like to pay. He's probably worth at least 12 million, Sean Ryan, meaning, and maybe even a little bit more than that. But he's probably worth like 3 years, 36, 4 years, 48 on the open market if Sean Ryan was a free agent right now, and if he plays as well this year as he did last year. So that's not like super crazy different. It's definitely more, right? They definitely paid a premium for him, but there's a reason why. I'm going to actually go through the negative of this first. In the final 6 games that Aaron Banks played this past year, he had a negative 0.65 grade. And you're saying, like, that's even worse. If he had a negative 0.65 grade in those final 6 games, now you're in much different territory. I would equate what he looked like in those weeks to Rasheed Walker, a good starter. And you have to remember that even a slight negative type player on the offensive line is actually above average because there's so few good offensive linemen in the league and you need 5 of them. It's nothing that I would be panicked or worried about, but you're basically looking at like the Rasheed Walker of left guards over the final 6 games of the season. But what you really need to look at is that in his first 7 games this past year, Aaron Banks had a plus 2.90 grade. And if you would extrapolate that over a 17 game season, that would have been a plus 7.00 grade, which would have put him as one of the best players on the team, but easily as the best offensive lineman on the team, better than Zach Tom or Elton Jenkins. That's how well he played in the first 7 games last year. And I know what you're immediately thinking. It's like, that's great. He didn't follow it up. Here's the thing. Week 8 and 10, he was still healthy. He had a negative 0.25 grade in those 2 games. He was still a plus, 2.65 in those first 9 games that he played. And that still is a plus 5.00 grade, which again is basically on the same wavelength as a Zach Tom. In week 10, he suffered a thigh injury, and going into week 11, he was on the injury report with that thigh injury. Weeks 12, or right in there, he got a concussion. In weeks 12 through 14, he was on the injured list with a concussion. And then week 16, suffered a knee injury, did not play in week 17. So those final games of the season, he was beat up with thigh injury, concussion, and knee injury, and didn't quite look like himself. And I get that this is still an if, I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but if Aaron Banks at the end of last year had a little bit of a setback due to injury and wasn't himself, and even then was like fine, solid, whatever, like not bad. If the true Aaron Banks is what we saw over the first 7 or even 9 weeks of the season, specifically and especially those first 7 weeks of the year, you have not only a player worthy, in my opinion, of that 4-year 77, but like absolutely more than worthy of the 4-year 77. Maybe that's a little bit aggressive because, guards just don't get, that much money. That's a pretty big deal for a guard, but you will get well worth the value that you paid for Aaron Banks if he plays that well. And just for me, the proof of concept that I saw in those first 7 games, I'm going through it and grading week by week, right? By the time I'm done with week 7, guys, I'm like freaking out because I'm like, they've got a really great guard here. I was so impressed, so consistent, the movement ability, good run blocker, good pass protector. I was ecstatic. Now, again, it's unfortunate that in his final, 6 or 7 games or whatever it was that he did play, it wasn't quite up to that same standard. And that's something that we're going to have to kind of keep an eye on is, can you kind of carry that over? But again, there were some injuries. What I'll add on top of that is even the bad game that he had, his worst game, even in that second half, even when he was dealing with some injury stuff, was a negative 0.45 grade. It's not a good game. It was against the Rams in week 15. The Rams are a really good defensive front, and you would certainly like to have that one back. If that's your worst game in a season as an offensive lineman, you're doing something really right. It is very easy to, have a game where you're allowing a few sacks or something. You just end up with this brutal grade. And Banks never had anything like that. So a negative 0.45 grade against the Rams being his worst grade on the entire season is pretty impressive in and of itself as well. So I saw a lot of things that I really liked on tape and had me wholeheartedly believing in the hype of the 4-year, $77 million deal through those first 7, 8, 9 weeks. And then again, with some injuries involved as well, fell off a little bit towards the end of the year. And even then was good, fine, average, not bad at all. And again, I think that that's noteworthy. I think if you're looking at it just based on the past year, not only how I graded it, but how I felt about it, the best case scenario here is that those first 7 weeks were real and that he can actually, as a healthy player in 2025, hopefully, knock on wood, I know that he's not even healthy, at least at the end of minicamp. He was sitting out those minicamp practices in the rehab group. But if he's healthy, right, and he can make it through the season healthy, you theoretically could have, I think, one of the best offensive linemen on the team, maybe even the best offensive lineman on the team. That's the best case scenario. He was that good over those first 7 weeks this past year. The likely scenario is that he's good, solid, sturdy, similar or maybe a little bit better than Sean Ryan, and probably not super dissimilar to Elton Jenkins. Maybe a small step down from where Elton was a season ago, but you're mostly staying apples to apples with where you were at left guard. Again, maybe a slight decrease. And in the meantime, you're going from Josh Myers to Elton Jenkins at center, which should be a massive improvement from where you were a season ago. And I think the worst case, as we kind of mentioned, if like all of a sudden it's the second half of the season that was the real Aaron Banks, and that's just who he is moving forward, you've got the Rasheed Walker of left guards. Is 4 years, 77 too much in that situation? Yeah, probably. Probably a lot too much. You probably have some level of regret in giving that deal, but it still gives you a solid offensive lineman. We're not talking about some bust level player who you can't play. He's still a worthy offensive lineman that can go out there and play and give you good snaps pretty consistently. So there's not a significant downside here other than, again, you got a solid but not great player and you're paying them a little bit too much to be that. But there is still a real possibility that Green Bay gets real value on that 4 year, $77 million deal. And I'll say it one more time. What I saw in those first 7 weeks was a immensely talented left guard that was playing at a very high level. And that had me extremely excited for what he could be in Green Bay. Hopefully, that's the Aaron Banks that we see moving forward. Of course, we're going to go through as well what I learned from watching every single snap of Aaron Banks. It was 776 snaps, something like that, over this past year. So graded every single one of those snaps. And again, when you do that, you're going to pick up some things along the way. Number one, as I mentioned, really enjoyed his tape from the first 7 weeks. Thought it was fantastic. Had me super geeked out. Number two, and we talked about this in his scouting report as well, the movement skills are legit. And for his size, the ability to move the way that he does is massively impressive. He can get to the second level. He can pull. He can get to anywhere that you need him to be on the field. And there are just so few players at that size that can get to any landmark that you need him to get to. And adding on top of that, what I'll say is so many offensive linemen get to the second level and get in the open field, and they really struggle to latch on and find a linebacker or secondary player because they're just too quick. That did happen to Banks from time to time, but he also was able to make some really impressive blocks on the second level against linebackers and secondary players to get them out of the picture and not let them avoid him and go make a play. And that was impressive as well, because especially with bigger offensive linemen, you get those guys out in the second level. It's great that they made it there, but then they still have to block somebody. And these guys are so savvy in the secondary because the offensive lineman, remember, can't see the running back behind him. So he's going to go out and attack the linebacker or safety. And the safety is going to start taking a beeline one way, pretending that the running back's going over there. So he goes to block him. And as soon as he takes that step, the linebacker or safety takes a step in the opposite direction where the running back actually is and goes and makes that play. But for Banks, it was not consistently an issue. Again, it happened time to time, but he was able to actually get out to the second level and make those blocks and latch onto those players in a good way. I'm not saying hold, but latch onto them and actually erase them from the play, giving the running back a little bit more opportunity to break one of those big runs in the open field. So movement skills and the ability to have that open field blocking, both real positives. I will say he is not what I would consider a mauler in the run game. He can move people. He will throw a couple players to the ground here or there. But if you're looking for this like complete beast mode mauler that's just ridiculously throwing guys out of the club on every single, he's not that. He's got a pretty even keeled demeanor. He's not the most nasty guy in the world, but he does his job. And he does it more of like as a silent assassin and not anything super flashy or pancakey, other than, again, a rare one here or there. And that's fine. It's not a negative for me. But if you're looking for this big mauling left guard because of his size, I would not necessarily define him as that. The movement skills, the seal ability, those things are much more what make Aaron Banks. And that's a very Packers type offensive lineman. I think he does a really nice job as well of keeping his head on a swivel, kind of always looking for work and seeing what's out there. There are times that he did struggle with some twists and stunts, but to me, his ability to kind of have that vision on what's going on and understand the concepts is very, very important. And I think his ability, again, to keep that head on the swivel and just know where guys are coming from and where they're going, it definitely helps him out and just keeps him a little bit more on balance and able to just identify where those rushers are coming from so he can be prepared for it. And if somebody's trying to pick him or twist or stun him or whatever, he's aware of what's exactly going on and can adjust accordingly. Let's see. He has the ability to seal in turn. So he can seal off or defensive lineman very easily. So gets to his spot using those movement skills and then just sealing and anchoring. So again, it's not a mauling play, but it uses those movement skills to get to where he needs to go. A lot of times it's on the outside shoulder of the defensive lineman. So he's on the inside and he's got to get to the outside, gets to that outside shoulder. And then again, just turns and seals and sits down and good luck. The defensive lineman is stuck in neutral, can't go anywhere. And then he also has the ability to get some offensive or defensive linemen turned as well. So just again, getting them as they're either chasing the play or getting to go in a certain direction, getting them completely turned out of the play and just using leverage to his advantage in those situations as well. So turned, sealed, whatever he needs to do, he does a really nice job of just getting that job done. Again, he might not be forklifting a guy or ripping him down and throwing him to the ground or anything like that. It's just pure solid blocking more often than not. He is a very Packers offensive lineman, movement skills with seal ability and turn ability. That's the Packers type, but he's a little bit bigger. Again, I'm not saying he's a mauler, but he does bring a little bit more heft to the position. And you can see it's tough to get around him as a pass blocker. And he does have a little bit of movement ability in the run game to move people. I would certainly more than what Josh Myers had as a center. Now you're again moving Jenkins over there, adding Banks to that offensive line. And I think you're going to see more movement ability on the interior, which is going to be very advantageous for Josh Jacobs. Consistency. I know that, again, there was a little bit of the fall off in the second half of the season. I do think injuries played a part in that. But overall, again, you're talking one bad game. Everything else was pretty either neutral or positive. And it was just that Rams game with a negative 0.45. And again, even that's not any sort of abysmal or terrible grade on any individual game for an offensive lineman. So I was very impressed overall with the entire body of work and how he stayed consistent week in and week out, attacking what he was supposed to attack, being a just very sound offensive lineman in both run blocking and in pass protection. I don't think he has a level of versatility that Green Bay usually looks for. Probably left guard, right guard, and that's it. I do wonder if he could play center in like a pinch. I actually think that there are some things that he does, and just from his movement ability, that he'd be an interesting study there. But he's probably left guard, right guard, and that's it. And for right now, he's probably going to stay at left guard and not even do much at right guard. And understandably so, he fits very well in that left guard position. And the last thing I'll say here is I can easily see what the Packers saw. Again, going back to the start of the season last year, he looked legitimately like a potential Pro Bowl caliber left guard. Again, it's an aggressive statement to make. I get it. We've talked about the other players so far that the Packers have signed. This is not just rose tinted glasses. Again, I give Andre Dillard a negative 6 point something grade last year when we did this exercise. And Josh Jacobs only had a plus 3.65. Nate Hobbs only a plus 1.50. Heck, even Aaron Banks only plus 2.25, right? It's not like I'm saying, look at, he's a negative or he's a plus 40 or something. He was solid last year, but I think the upside and what you saw in the early parts of last season really showed that he has the ability to be that Pro Bowl caliber guard. Now, can he get there consistently and play a whole season that way? That remains to be seen. He has not done that in San Francisco. Now he needs to try to find a way to do it in Green Bay. I think he can, but he's going to have to go out and prove that. And hopefully, if he can, he could be in for a massive season with the Packers, and it would be a huge just signing for Green Bay, and it'd be a huge step in the right direction for that offensive line if Banks can be as good as he was in the first part of the season for San Francisco this past year. My final thoughts here, the Packers are betting on that high side. They saw his whole body of work, and they saw that first half of the year last year and said, that's who we think he can become. That's who he is. And if they bet on that and they're right, it's going to pay off, I think, in a pretty significant way, adding a real legitimate, I think Pro Bowl caliber left guard to this offensive line, which signed me up, especially when you get Josh Myers leaving and Elton Jenkins taking his spot. That has the ability to be a massive upgrade. And if you look at the grades, right, and I get that just because the players previously were bad does not give you more credit for signing these players, but it does absolutely mean that you're going to be improved. And you look at Nate Hobbs plus Aaron Banks, their grades together this past year, plus 3.75. Eric Stokes and Josh Myers, the two players that they're replacing, negative 6.45. That is a difference of plus 10.20. I cannot stress to you enough how much that individually just adds to a team. That plus 10.20, it takes you up a whole nother stratosphere as a team. Like legitimately, I think it adds a huge value and makes you a much more well-rounded team. And especially the fact that you're getting one in the trenches and one in the defensive backfield, and you're exchanging them out and making them pretty significantly better. Huge, absolutely huge. So I get that Aaron Banks, Nate Hobbs, maybe not the biggest names in the world, maybe not the biggest signings. And you can argue maybe Green Bay overpaid a little bit to acquire their services. But where Green Bay was with Stokes and with Josh Myers, my lowest graded defender, my lowest graded offensive player, to now Aaron Banks and Nate Hobbs, you should be excited about that overall transaction and transition into those two players. It should be, knock on wood, a huge win for the Packers and hopefully another huge win in free agency for Brian Gutekunst. That is going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. I always appreciate your kindness and your support. I'll be right back here tomorrow with an all-new episode. Shout out to our All-Pro and Hall of Fame members, Most Hated Minnesotan, PJ Wayne, John Wild, Brandon Paletta, Boom Handle, Donna Lee, Lori Lord, Baby QB, David McCluskey, Donald Decker, Alex Wong, Peter Rataka, Jay Zimmerman, B. Brown, Puerto Rican Packer, Dan Gessford, Dylan Pat Scott, SoCal Pack, Chris Rager, Izzy Roberts, Ian Ewing, Jake Koner, Carlo Delgado, Willie Winklesingle, Jen Wright, The Gable Storm, Matt Geiger, Pack Attack Cast, and Chris Weish. I'll see you guys tomorrow. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.